Hey everybody, it's Richard Harris and Scott Leese with our 254th episode of the Surf and Sales podcast in 18 months. So Scott, I don't know, I'm tired, not tired of doing them, but wow, who knew? Super excited today, and before we introduce our guest, want to thank our sponsors of Lead 411, Gong.io, the game changer in conversation intelligence, Salesforce Sales Cloud, and Vidyard, who is also leading the space in video content. So without any further ado, and Rob, I didn't even look it up. I'm not sure how you want to be introduced, but here, head of revenue operations. Sorry, there we go. Robb Finkelstein at Heyday. So Rob, thanks for joining us. And I know, we're going to dive into a couple of things, but please give people a little bit of your background, maybe tell them what are your deal sizes like? What's your average sales cycle? Just to give them some context as we have conversations.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. So Heyday is an e-commerce marketplace acceleration company. So what we do is we are acquiring and investing in the next generation of leading e-commerce brands and maximizing their growth. And we're specifically today focused across the online marketplace ecosystem. So revenue operations and sales at Heyday looks quite a bit different than it does at, say, a SaaS company or a lot of typical other companies. The product we're selling is an acquisition of these people's business. And so, we have today we have a full cycle account executive team with 3 account executives. They're, handling inbound, but obviously doing a lot of outbound prospecting, having conversations with owners of e-commerce companies, primarily, Amazon sellers today. And so the deal is us acquiring the business. So the average deal size is somewhere, I got to be a little bit careful about the specifics that I give out, but average deal size is anywhere, 10 to $30 million, with that sales cycle being anywhere from, 4 to 6 months typically.
That blows my mind, right? Like that is in 6 months or 4 months, you can put that together. And I know we don't want to, you can't give away all the secret sauce, but certainly brings to mind like, okay, revenue operations. So how do you define RevOps versus sales ops? You've sort of grown up in the space, and it seems to be a good topic these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to overcomplicate it. I think simplified, like revenue operations supports the operations, strategy, execution, and analytics that surround all functions that enable and support revenue, the generation and retention of revenue. Whereas I think sales operations is a little more focused on solely on that new business, development activities. So I'd say sales operations is typically focused on, business development, account executives, things that lead to new revenue, where revenue operations is focused on that, but also customer success. They're supporting marketing, implementation, really the entire customer journey from end to end. So I see sales operations as a function that falls under revenue operations.
Well, who are like the gold standard people in RevOps that everybody should, kind of follow and learn from? Like, where do you go to seek your ultimate truth?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of thought leadership out there. I would say a couple companies, just from my experiences with them, that I think do it really well. And it's just easy to call out 2 companies that both raise, really impressive rounds at really impressive valuations, like Outreach and Gong. You kind of think about how Outreach has been at the forefront of modern, today's sales engagement. And I think they really have not only mastered it, but continue to evolve, what a high caliber sales engagement function looks like. I think Gong, with conversation intelligence, and now, things they're putting around, pipeline management and deal acceleration, are kind of a best in class company when it comes to, selling, and improving selling and things like that. But I've also taken company, demos or had calls or worked with other companies that I think are doing it really well. So I think Clary, not a company I've specifically used, but They put good content out there, are good thought leaders in the space. And I actually think Salesforce, for being, such a giant company, does a really good job as well.
So you're in a unique position, not just because of what the company does and sells and acquires, but because you're in RevOps and you're one of the first people in there. For context, there's only a couple salespeople and a head of growth and Robb, RevOps. I've been a big proponent of getting RevOps involved really, really early. From your perspective and your side of the table, why is it so critical for sales ops, RevOps to be a part of the sales org and growth right from the start?
Yeah. So luckily, thanks to you, Scott, I got the opportunity to really get in early and start to build out the revenue operations function from scratch early in the company's history, and in parallel with us starting our founding account executive team. And so, I did get to experience really building this out from scratch, and I get to imagine what it would be like if we weren't doing that from the very beginning. And I think like the easiest answer is, since we started, I've been asked so many questions around the performance of the business, what's working, what's not, what do we do next, this and that. We would have no capability to answer any of those questions if it weren't for revenue operations. So the data that's collected in the CRM, the automation of the collection of as much data as possible, leveraging sales engagement platforms and other integrations, and really creating formal SLAs and formal go-to-market strategy and formal operating procedures has put us in a place where the data architecture is very clean. There's a very straightforward process that we're following. And so to be able to understand what's working, what's not, and really, make tweaks and test different things as you go, the existence of revenue operations has been obviously essential to that. Otherwise, what I imagine it would look like, and what they said is just, we'll figure it out. So you would have every rep with their own spreadsheet. They'd be making calls on their cell phone, sending email.
Yeah. Have you been in that position before where you came into a company and you hadn't been there from the beginning and they'd had no RevOps function, and you showed up and there's a dozen reps with a dozen different spreadsheets, everybody's sending different, email communications, people talking, on the phone, different, running demos different. Can you talk about that, if you've experienced that, about how hard it is to clean up that mess and get everything aligned?
Yeah, I actually have. I came into a company where at the time they had about 45 BDRs and 25 account executives, and then not to mention like the post-sales teams. And they had this company was raising a Series C at the time, and they had only invested in promoting a sales manager into a sales ops role for the first time about a year prior to me joining. So that person was doing an amazing job with what they had. They did a great job learning the function, but obviously that's not enough to support the company was growing, over 100% year over year. And so it was very challenging. Like I remember in my first week, one of the questions I asked was like, is there a daily target for calls? And the answer was, well, technically it's this, but since data call information doesn't sync reliably back to the CRM, we're not really enforcing it. And I'm like, well, then how do you know, if your reps are being productive? How do you know? And it was just kind of like, well, if they're, hitting their quota, if they're not. And so there's just such a lack of insight that was needed. And the first 6 months of my time there was fixing systems, getting insight, getting formal processes in place. The way the data was architected in the CRM was super prohibitive. So I spent about 6 months just focused on that.
It seems like instead of ever going back to a VP of sales role, you should become a RevOps person, because you'd last.
I'm not smart enough to be a RevOps person.
But you're smart enough to hire the people underneath you to do the.
Yes, but that part's true.
You'd last longer than 18 months, right?
That's probably true as well.
That's the reason. So, so how did that work? Like, how did the team get it? Like, you're talking about big change management, particularly at that level, right? And then I'd like to come back to say, okay, so before you do that, like, before you work into that, like if you're a Series A or something, like what do you look for to build first? But how did you even just navigate the anxiety of change that I'm sure existed when you walked in the door?
Uh,
You're almost like a CFO walking in, so to speak, if you're not careful.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I like cried as I was leaving the office every day no, I'm kidding. No, the managing the anxiety, that is a lot of what it was. So first of all, I think having the buy-in from management and the buy-in from leadership is essential. So luckily I got to start at the same time and was brought in by a new chief revenue officer that was starting at the time. So there was kind of a cultural shift happening within the revenue org as I joined. More formalization, less tribal knowledge. And so that really did lend to being able to make these changes. I think the most important thing is one, obviously laying out everything that you have to do, understanding the effort involved and the effort towards adoption that's involved, and doing proper prioritization. And I think it's super important that you're actually communicating the why, like what, not only why is this important, but what is the sales team, or what are the people adopting these changes going to get out of it? And obviously, like, explain. So you're explaining to the sales team, why is this going to make you more successful? Why is it going to make the business more successful? So yeah, I think it's all about prioritization. And yeah, we switched sales engagement platforms. We moved to a whole new series of reports and dashboards to manage the business. But you trust the process and you start to see results, and I think that gets you buy-in as you continue to optimize.
Did you run, and this is not meant to be critical. Did you run into the challenge I often see where the people who got you where you are may not be the people who are going to take you where you need to go? Or were you able to navigate that in such a way, because once you have a team of that big, hopefully there's talent, right? Like it's not like you got 44 people and 10 are being productive, right? At least I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's where like balance is pretty important, because this is a team. This isn't an optional thing. I think one of the worst things you can do is coddle top performers to the point where, no, it's okay, you don't have to do this because like we just want you to be happy. But there's a balance there at the same time. Like every rep doesn't sell the same way, and every rep isn't successful in the same way. So it's making sure that they still have the room to do the things that make them top performers while complying and being within the new framework that the team is operating under. And 100%, especially when you have a company raising a bunch of VC and hiring like crazy and growing like crazy, you're going to have sales reps that were there at the beginning and will be pretty shocked by how drastically things are changing. And often that comes with increase in oversight and things like that. And you have to be, sometimes you're going to part ways, and some people are going to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I've always said, look, if you got a team of 44, there's a pecking order, right? And number 4, 5, and 6 are happy to become number 1, 2, and 3. And oftentimes that energy will, propel them to even do better than what was there before. Not always, but it's not always bad, right? We don't ever want to lose a top performer. And look, these are humans, and so they're not, they're not a number, as Scott's new book is. You're way more than that. It's just sometimes you have to make those tough decisions. So what do you do in the beginning, right? You're coming in, you're not inheriting 44 people, right? What are the top 3 things you would tell people? Okay, this is what it is. And when you say words like, if you're like, oh, put systems in place. Okay, well, what kind of systems? Like I want to get tactical.
Sure. Okay. So systems, process, and data. Okay. Systems. I think obviously table stakes is you need a CRM. So we put Salesforce into place. If you're doing, I think no matter what, you need a sales engagement platform, but if you're doing any kind of outbound, you definitely need a sales engagement platform. And then I think data and systems, right? There are systems that enable the data or that provide the data, so that could lump in there too. But I think those are, in today's world where there's 10,000 different sales tech vendors, it's easy to get FOMO and get overwhelmed and think that you need a tech solution for every single aspect of your process. And I actually think in the beginning, like that's new adoption on 10 different systems. That's implementation, that's making them work together. And so I really think starting out systems wise, like CRM and sales engagement are table stakes, but I'm not sure anything else is essential at that point.
So how do you navigate those three things? Because they're all important, like they're all urgent and they're all important, right?
Yeah.
So do you start with, hey, I need to look at my data first. I need to look at, like, how would you advise someone, like, hey, Rob, I'm coming to you. I want you to mentor me, and you're like, oh, sure. Okay. So let's talk about your systems, process, and data. Where do I even start? Because you can, to your point, you can overwhelm yourself with tools if you don't have a smart roadmap to it.
Yeah, so I think it's going to partially, you as a RevOps leader, you do have to come to the table with that framework and that plan. But at the same time, I think part of it has to align with the priorities and the motion of the business. So when I first joined, we were launching a large marketing campaign. 2 weeks after I joined, we were going to launch a large marketing campaign and we were going to start 3 account executives. So I knew the first 2 things that I had to do were create those cadences and the content around responding to inbound leads, because we were about to get a large influx of inbound leads to a brand new team. So we needed to have the cadence and content there to support them. And we needed to have CRM in place to obviously capture the leads and capture the data. So to me, those, that was obvious because we were, going to see a large influx of inbound. And then most importantly, you need to arm your end users, arm your sales team for success. So things like call scripting and, objection and rebuttal handling, and things like, competitive landscape analysis, product knowledge, industry knowledge. If you're going to be, bringing in a sales team and they're going to be getting thrown into it right away, you need to be focused on arming them with as many resources and abilities and training as you possibly can. And then I would say after that comes the data and the content and the cadence and the process around outbound. If that's something you're going to do, obviously that takes a lot and something has to be built out, but can't put the cart before the horse. If the sales team gets a response to an email or gets a call that's picked up, they need to be able to utilize that, make the most out of that engagement.
What are some creative kind of practical tips that you've implemented to simplify sales reps' lives inside of the CRM, inside of all these tools? Because you kind of alluded to it. I don't think you used the phrase, but there's tool fatigue going on. So what are a few things that you've kind of done that gets greater adoption and, prevents this fatigue where reps have to, they feel like there's this laborious process where they've got to enter in, 30 pieces of information before they can, move something to the next stage. What are some kind of hacks that you've put together there?
Yeah, absolutely. So limiting data entry to the greatest extent possible by automating data capture as much as you can. So for example, in terms of outbound, our sales team isn't creating an account in Salesforce and they're not out on their own looking for contacts to the greatest extent that we can handle it. So I myself as the RevOps function am loading all the accounts into the system. We're working with a third-party firm that's sourcing contact info. It's a little less straightforward on Amazon than it is in a lot of businesses. So
yeah,
we can't just Zoom info but I didn't put it on them, right? That's my responsibility. So now you're going into the system and everything's right there ready for you to attack. And then talk about logging calls. In today's world, why would a sales rep ever be logging a call other than clicking the button to log the call on the sales engagement platform, and that's syncing to Salesforce. So all their email, SMS, meeting recordings, meeting information, call activity, everything you can possibly automate, you should be. It's just less that they have to do. I think a central framework for taking notes so that everyone's being consistent in how they're logging notes into the CRM. I think documenting the processes, obviously you don't want them to have to read through a ton of process documentation, but just the basics of this is when you create an opportunity and this is how you do it. This is the definition of the different stages, so on and so forth. And then I'd also say getting feedback from the sales team, consistently, right as you start, what are you guys seeing that works? What have you done at past companies that has worked and that hasn't? As the RevOps leader, you have to be the subject matter expert, but if the sales team is a part of the process, they're going to buy into the decision-making and strategy. They're going to buy into it.
Did you hear that, Richard? He said salespeople should not have to source their own leads.
Well, that was one part that I liked. The other part was, you know, don't make them read a big thick book of, processes and procedures. Although I'm curious how big your book is, Rob, in terms of process and procedure. If I'm a new rep, how big is it?
It's not that big. We're the book on learning about the Amazon ecosystem and what an Amazon seller, what their life is like. That book is much larger than the How to Navigate Salesforce.
That's the piece that I feel like people overlook so much in onboarding and training, is that your industry and customer knowledge should be twice as much as your process knowledge, if not 3 times. And I think it's the opposite because people don't know how to do it. And I think also in startups, it's very different too, because they don't necessarily have it all, but I think that's a good measure. So I like that. We talked earlier before we jumped on, and I made you pause on, sort of action over, intent kind of thing, which Scott gets on me all about. And, you sort of put your hands in, you almost did like a face palm thing. So how do you navigate that? How do you, cause you're driving a big ship too. So how do you navigate?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially in revenue roles and sales roles, like the things you're doing are going to be customer or prospect facing. So you do have to be, you do want to measure twice before you cut once. You do have to be careful, but at the same time, what's the phrase? Like perfection is the enemy of great or something. And so, yeah, like an MVP is okay. Like ship something, see how it works, and like you're never going to get anything done if you don't just commit to a culture of like execution and constant iteration. So an example would be like spending 3 weeks on a sales cadence versus spending a day on a sales cadence, letting it go live, and then after 2 weeks looking at your engagement rates and response rates and what types of responses you're getting, and continuously iterating that way. And so, yeah, I think often leadership like wants to control everything. And it's important to help them understand, like maybe in certain scenarios, why that's not necessary and what benefits you might be able to see from being a little more agile with, what you're willing to do in terms of go-to-market.
Where is this field going next? What do you think the next frontier is?
For revenue operations?
Yeah, for RevOps in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I'm starting to see, one thing that I think is kind of obvious is like teams are continuing to invest more and more in their revenue operations functions and their team. I think over the last 5 to 10 years, you've seen a lot of like RevOps teams of one or a very low level of specialization. So like you have someone who's a RevOps manager, but are they really just a Salesforce admin? Or, you have someone calling themselves RevOps, but they're not really supporting all the go-to-market revenue functions. So I think the evolution kind of looks like, you have a RevOps leader and you have specialized functions within the team. You have someone focused on the systems. You have someone focused on marketing, someone focused on success, someone focused on new business. So I think specialization within RevOps is a big one. And I think we'll almost see like getting smarter with systems. I think people are buying a lot of tech that they don't know how to adopt. And so I guess what I'm hoping is that people realize that it takes a large investment to get, a return on even one thing that you're implementing or doing. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see just along the tech landscape. Like, I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes. It'll be interesting to see if there's a shift where more functionality gets consolidated into fewer tools. Because right now it seems like there's a separate tool for everything. But as that landscape matures, it'll be interesting to see how things can kind of consolidate over time.
How do you think about the spend in your vendor kind of toolbox? Like, is there a formula that you use? Like, number of reps times X number of dollars equals Y. Like, I'm trying to get a sense. This is for sales leaders out there, because they ask me this question quite a bit. It's like, well, how do I know if I have too much stuff, or how do I know if I've underinvested? Like, what is the amount people are spending on a per rep basis per month? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever put it into a per rep basis. I've seen stuff around that.
That's shocking to me because I always hear the phrase of, what's my sales stack per rep? Interesting. Keep going.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I think what's more important is understanding how to analyze a return on investment and understanding that like, it's not just like implement the tool, get an ROI. So for example, like oftentimes you'll hear, well, if this tool just helps me close one more deal, then it's worth it. But like, is it? So like, first of all, is the deal you close, is the revenue similar to your cost of the tool? Because if so, you didn't pay for the tool. It's your margin, it's your bottom line dollars that you generate solely from the use of this tool has to be, what covers your initial cost. And so actually understanding the unit economics of your deals and being able to relate that back to an ROI is super important. And I think just not being as simple as like, well, if this helps us close this many deals, I think you truly have to understand, what is this tool going to help us do? Oh, it's going to help us put 5 more opportunities in the pipeline per month. Okay, what's our average deal size? What's our conversion rate? What does that look like? And then I think understanding the cost of adoption, the cost, how much bandwidth is it going to be to implement it? And what is this potentially going to distract reps from doing, in order to use this tool? And so, yeah, I think just having a more rigorous analytical framework for understanding ROI is important.
What's a reasonable adoption timeline in your mind? Like if you purchase a tool and you're able to roll it out, train on it, and it's inside of a week and people are using it inside of a month, like what is a good amount of time there, you think?
Yeah, I think it depends, but I would say definitely inside of a month, but probably more than a week. So I'd say like, and it depends. I think something like a contact enrichment service, like the adoption should probably be under a week, right? Like you find the person on LinkedIn and you're pulling in their contact info and just making sure that someone's actually doing that and always looking for fresh contact info. Like that shouldn't take a lot of hand holding. Something like a new sales engagement platform, I mean, they have 10 different functions that support 10 different areas of the workflow. So that might be closer to a month. And I think it's going to be about prioritizing, the most impactful ones.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always tell people, because I hear this all the time. Well, if we just close one deal, we pay for you. And I'm like, if you close one deal, you should be fired.
Right.
You need to, like I said, you need to go present this to your upper management that, even Richard says, if we don't do 10X what we pay him, then Richard failed, right? Like that's sort of how I see it. And so it's on my job to do that. And to a certain extent, you put that on the vendor, not always, right? But that adoption matters because they're always about customer success. I have a question, which is, who do you like working with the most? The VP of marketing, the VP of sales, or the VP of customer success? As a RevOps leader, who do you like working with the most? Yes, you have to rank them 1, 2, 3.
And why?
Walking into a trap on this one. All right. Well, it's the VP of sales, then it's the VP of customer success, and then it's the VP of marketing. I know it's a super surprising.
I actually love this answer. I want to know why VP of marketing gets ranked last.
Okay, so I'll answer that. I think VP of marketing, and by the way, I've had like really good experiences with marketing leadership at my past companies, but you guys made me rank them, and I had to
present company excluded, because
of course you have. I'm just thinking about the VPs of marketing that I want to share this episode with and give them a little bit of help.
Right. I think this is just a very like sales marketing alignment. Like everyone's always talking about sales and marketing alignment. And I just think there's, this isn't a problem of any individual VP of marketing. And if anything, this might be the issue with the VP of sales or the CRO or something. But those departments, marketing, sales, are typically incentivized by different KPIs or are typically measured based on different KPIs or different outcomes, when in fact, obviously, like this is the same team moving towards the same goal. And so I think that sometimes marketing will have will have potentially a completely accurate perception of the what it takes to get the sales team engaging around a certain thing. So like an obvious answer would be like calling content downloads, right? Like I've worked with marketing leaders before that wants to treat a content download as a lead that we can call them because inbound, opportunities are a really important KPI. And so I think that is on revenue operations to really bridge that gap and have every team driving towards the most important goals and the most important KPIs. But sometimes it can be challenging with, they want to make their stuff look like it was successful. And that measure of success might not always be aligned with other functions in the Rev org.
I think this is really, really good. So who writes better content, sales or marketing then?
I think it depends. I don't know. The marketing teams I've worked with were actually really good content writers. So I'm going to say marketing for that one.
All right. Yeah, he's just placating the crowd.
Well, Robb is a bit unique in my experience in that as a RevOps leader, he participates heavily in copywriting and the creation of copywriting, rather than just, loading it into the enablement tool. You feel pretty strongly that should be best practices, Robb?
Well, it all depends on what your team looks like. So I think that, we are limited in terms of resources on the new business side of the current company. Like we don't have a marketing team, we don't have an enablement team. And so like, that's kind of the obvious answer. And so I've been writing the content and then I bring it to the sales team and they tear it apart and tell me like how we should rewrite it, but at least gives us something to go off of. I think typically that's something you want enablement to drive and sales leadership to really own. So at ShipBob, which is my last company, we actually had something called content committee. It was the revenue, or someone on the revenue operations team was like the quarterback of that team. So they made sure that they were meeting bi-weekly and they were taking a data-driven approach to content creation and optimization. But it was a collection of, we had a couple people from the marketing team, we had a handful of BDRs, a couple managers, team leads, and they worked together as a committee to create and optimize content. I thought that was a really impactful approach.
We've been talking a lot about kind of what to do when you're in the role and where the role is going. Can we go back all the way to the very beginning? And what kind of questions should one be prepared for if they're interviewing for a RevOps role, a head of RevOps role? Help the people who are interested in this function, getting into it for the first time, or are trying to move up in that field. What are some of the questions that they need to be prepared for and the right kind of answers to those questions?
Oof, yeah, that's a loaded question. That's a good one. And I just did this like 6 months ago, so it should be more fresh on my mind. But I think like obviously something you're going to get asked is what data is important? What data should we be looking at? What data should we be collecting? And so I think the answer there is kind of like there's different types of data. There's data on your market. So I think having a really clear understanding of what your total addressable market is and that size and how you go out and get it, as well as your ideal customer profile. It's amazing to me how often we're still like selling to the wrong people at the company. And I say that like in terms of like 50% of the stuff that tries to get sold to me is just like a total miss. So I think understanding your total addressable market, understanding your ideal customer profile and who that persona is. And then I would say like funnel, like this is very obvious and it's not one size fits all, but like funnel math is very important. So as you get going and your sales team is performing activities and penetrating territories, putting ops in the funnel, closing deals, like how many calls does it take to get a meeting? How many meetings does it take to get an op? What's your opportunity conversion rate? But also you can't oversimplify, like opportunity conversion rate in a vacuum is probably going to tell you the wrong thing. So you probably need to break that down by, it could be a market or it could be by a vertical. It could be by a size. It might be by a size bucket within each vertical. And you don't want to overanalyze, but like you're going to be, looking at the wrong things if you're not getting granular enough. So I think that funnel math and, things like sales velocity, And then I think there's more, I don't know if this is as much of it, but there's more contextual things, like, what's
what kind of contextual things? Like, does somebody have to have sold before? Do they have to have the context of knowing what it's like to make cold calls all day long, to get rejected on demos? What kind of context are you talking about?
No, I just meant the context around like contextual data. Like email, what's working in terms of, I know emails and calls, like you might have an intelligence tool. But to zoom back out into what else are they going to ask you? They're going to ask you what systems and tech you need. So it's obviously important to understand what the team is focused on today and where the biggest gaps are. And so yeah, like being able to answer what kind of systems we need. They're going to ask you what the team should look like how many people should be in each role based on the goals we want to hit. So obviously it's important for you to understand the data to make a recommendation around what the team structure should look like. They might ask you who should own what within certain things, like who should own the creation of content writing, who should own CRM, who should own, this and that. I'm trying to think of what else. Like, I think things around go to market, like where should we be focused? Should we be focused within these segments or these territories? Those are probably some of the more common questions you're going to see in an interview. And then again, it just like depends. Like something that I was caught off guard in an interview in the past is I was asked the specific unit economics and data around like what's your customer acquisition cost and lifetime value of your customer and payback period and so on and so forth. Like if you're getting interviewed by the CFO or the director of finance, you need to think about what questions are going to be important to that person. And so that in that context, like those are things that you're going to want to know.
Sorry to distract you. I was watching my son and his friend outside. I was just sort of apologizing, so people wonder why Rob stumbled for a second. It was my fault. Before we go into our last question, a quick shout out to our sponsors of Salesforce, Sales Cloud, Lead 411, Vidyard, and Gong.io, the game changer in revenue intelligence. So thanks to them, we appreciate their support. So Rob, we always do this at the end of every episode, which is, do you have a question for us that we can answer?
Oh man, I should have came more prepared for this one. Do you have a question you guys should answer? Yeah, I'm gonna turn it back on you. What do you guys think the best revenue operations teams are doing in the next 3 to 5 years? Like how are the best revenue operations leaders from your perspective? What are they doing that's setting them apart from your average RevOps team?
I think they're learning the craft more, but very specifically, and I think you have to be of a certain size, but they have to be paying a certain percentage of time to where's this AI going to really take us? Like, how is AI really going to benefit me? And it's going to be very different at Series A versus B, C, D, and public companies, because I think that is the next forefront. And right now, a couple of years ago, it was, we have an algorithm, right? Like that was everybody's pitch, right? Before that was, we can make you more effective and efficient, everybody's pitch. And now we're hearing we've got AI behind us. And it's like, particularly sales leaders, like, okay, prove it to me. Show me your AI, right? And I think the curious ones, people who are being curious are the ones that are going to win. So that's the first piece. And I think the other things that they're doing are, to your point, anything that I can prevent my rep from typing that can be captured, recorded, transcribed, put in the CRM and built into a scoring mechanism, whatever that looks like for you. Those are the pieces that I see the successful people doing, because, and it's always a cat and mouse between, getting the rep to do it. Then comes a tool that does some level of efficiency. Now all of a sudden that tool, you maybe outgrown it. It's not outdated, but you've outgrown it. And then, which then means you go back to manual for a little bit, and then you move forward again with the next. So that's what I see at a high level.
Yeah, I think that's, oh yeah, please, Scott.
No, my thought is that I think what is going to happen is people who move into the RevOps function are going to come from some of these other departments. It's going to become much more of a career path, and therefore the folks in head of revenue operations roles are going to have more of a contributor kind of background. Like they're going to be used to copywriting, they're going to be used to cold calling, they're going to be used to doing demand gen kind of stuff. And I think that leads to point number 2, which is you're going to have to be able to surface a lot of insights and be very proactive about it. As a partner to people in these other departments and the ones closest to the tools and all the data, I think your job is to, hey, we found this, I'm delivering it to you. This shows kind of where our problem is. Now I, as a sales leader, can go coach on that particular thing. I'm pretty tired of the VP of spreadsheets, or as what Richard called himself, the dashboard manager. I think, part of the reason there's a coaching problem in sales is because sales leadership is spending too much time staring at data all day long and not enough time with their people coaching them. And so I think you got to surface those insights. And I think what eventually happens is if you've been a contributor, you move into RevOps, you surface insights proactively, you're going to find yourself with a seat at the executive table. And I think it's not that many more years before RevOps kind of functionality finds themselves with VP titles and in the executive room. And I think that's what the best people will do.
I think I already see some of that to some extent. And I can tell you that, I have PTSD from when I worked for Scott, and he would text us all, get off your CPU, right? All he would preach to us was sit next to your reps all day long. And it was a balance between, okay, well, we do have to do some level of dashboarding stuff, but he was really good at encouraging that, which was something I really needed. Some of the other managers were, I think, better at it, but but I still get off your CPU. We're like, what's a fucking CPU? So
it means computer, Richard. Get off.
Yeah, right.
Central processing unit, Scott. I'm not aware of what CPU means. So
No.
Let's remember, I was using a CPU when you were still a teenager. So
well, that's probably true. I should know better than for you to understand text language. From 2021, Richard. Come on.
I was curious if you even caught Robb's Ross Perot reference for, measure twice and cut once, but I
did not.
Yeah, exactly. So
I did not. I missed that.
Well, I didn't realize it was his reference. So there you go.
Say that again.
I didn't realize it was his reference.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. That's how old I am, people. Thank you. So Robb, thanks so much, man. We really appreciate really diving deep on this topic that I see people talking about all the time now. And I particularly think in 2021, the rest of this year and next year, it's really going to explode, because from 2022, everybody had to do this hard reset, which was probably healthy, for the business. And aside from the physical piece of people being hurt, I don't mean to make light of that, but thank you so much, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. Really enjoyed the conversation.